Okay, hey guys, we're on live. Hopefully the connection is good. And I'll give people time to come on as we intro. But, oh, my hair is a mess. So anyway, thank you. So anyway, my husband and I had a conversation, as I posted earlier today, about Christianity and masturbation. And so we wanted to share with everyone. Okay, people are starting to come in. Okay, good. So you can see the number at the top.
Okay, I see.
So we want to share with everyone what we were talking about and how we came about this and all this, because we got a lot of feedback from you guys saying, go live, talk about it live. And it was a really good conversation. Hopefully we can capture that moment.
You know how forgetful I am, so.
Hopefully we can capture, hi Angie,
hey,
how
up,
we
Angie?
felt and all the things we said. We don't remember every single thing that we said. So we'll try to capture it. We'll try to capture some of it at least. So the way this conversation came about is we were talking about an article that went out recently about people being able to be honest with their spouse on lust. And can husbands go, hello, hi Africa, hi Tracy, hi Nisha.
Hey,
and can husbands go, or do they feel comfortable to go to their wives about lust? About lusting after a woman, or the things that they're going to. And this is going to be from a biblical standpoint. So this is going to be, that's why the title said Christianity, and because we're going to go from biblical point of view. And as Christians walking through this situation. So that's how this came up, is we were discussing about how open can you be with your spouse when it comes to lust? Can you confess to one another? Hey, oh, thank you, Jasmine.
Oh, yeah.
Very well. Can you confess to one another? Do you feel safe enough to confess to one another? Is that openness there? Because it is important to know what your spouse go through, especially as Christian couples, because you can pray for each other, you can minister to each other. So that is an important key to have, is to be open and honest with each other. So the way it started was my husband came to me and he came to me with a confession. And so I just sat there and said, okay. And I listened and I was open to what he had to say. And then I came in on my thoughts with it. So.
All right, my turn?
Yes.
All right. So I had, there's an app and it's called Ask Pastor John. And there was a person on there, Jackie Hill Perry, right? Mm-hmm. And like what my wife was saying, he was just talking about lust and how spouses should be open, husbands be open to the spouse and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And so we were at Soup Plantation, and I was just some reason that conversation came up, and I was just telling my wife I wanted to tell her some things, but I felt unsafe. And at that point, she just looked at me. And I was just like, okay, I'll caught red-handed, kind of. And basically what I mean is, it's like the Holy Spirit was just like, that's not her, that's you. And that's when I was just telling her, because usually we are very open and transparent. Mm-hmm. But for myself, I was just at that place, just like, I didn't want to tell her what was going on, because I didn't want her to look at me in a different way, but usually I am pretty transparent.
Yeah, and at that point when he said, I feel unsafe, I had to immediately talk to myself, because immediately you want to say, well, what did I do or what? But I immediately told myself, you didn't do anything for him to feel unsafe. Like, you're the same person he's always been open with. Like, nothing you did that would make him unsafe. So I had to tell myself that.
Yeah, so then I went, so basically I just went in. I was just like, let me just go ahead and tell her. So I just told her I was just battling lust. I didn't really go into a lot of details, but one of the details that I told her, which at first, I'll be honest, we were talking about doing this for Facebook Live, but I was just like, okay, do I want to do this? Because I'm putting out my own personal business. But I do this because I just want to help other husbands and help other people that's watching. Mm-hmm. And so I told her, I said, you know what? I've masturbated a few times. Mm-hmm. And And when I said it, she just Summer, she just looked at me like she usually does. She's pretty understanding. And I just was just kind of explaining just what I was feeling. So I was just telling her, look, because I have a past of pornography, being addicted to pornography. So I was just telling her, look, I'm not doing pornography or anything like that. I just found myself at a place not. When you're going through some things, you're not thinking maybe sometimes rationally. Mm-hmm. But this is my thoughts. I was just like, well, I just felt like if I did it, that would maybe keep me from having to feel like I'm bothering you or mm-hmm. approaching you about sex all the time. Mm-hmm. And so I figured, okay, if I do this, then maybe, she's wanting me to hold her and all that other stuff, that maybe that'd be the route to go. And, but as I was talking to her, I was just sharing with her, like, but I just didn't want to do it anymore because I remember a person called, his name is Ezekiel, he's a poet, mm-hmm. and he was talking about it, and I was just at a place where like, I don't want this to ever become an addiction again. And also, I didn't want to turn to masturbation instead of turning to God. And because you just have to be so careful. Because sometimes it could start out that way, just like, well, I just want to pleasure myself, and it's not really going to hurt anybody or anything like that. But for me, I was just thinking I didn't want to do anymore because there's other things we'll kind of basically talk about because I want to leave some things for Summer to bring up because I want to kind of go I wanted to go into kind of like the way we were talking about the discussion. But I was just like, I just didn't want to turn to that and let that become more of an idol and to pull me and to cause, I guess, even some of the lust that was in my heart. I didn't want it to basically collide and I get back into that place that I used to be at, where lust and eventually masturbation come together. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want that to separate us. But there was also a place that I didn't want it to separate. It started to become between me and God. Mm-hmm. I think a place of practicality. There's practical stuff. So, because that's just where I'm at. I just want to love God and glorify God. But I've been told two things: that masturbation is sin, and also that masturbation isn't. I did some Christian counseling, and you have Christian counselors to say that as long as if you don't have lustful thoughts in your mind and you do pleasure yourself and masturbate, that it's not a sin. And I guess I basically tried to experiment with that. And I just, before I tell you kind of like my conclusion of how I feel about everything, I just want to continue to go on with maybe more of the conversation.
Yeah. So when he told me that he did, of course, my first thought is why? And then when he said, well, I didn't want to bother you for sex all the time. I didn't want to keep coming for sex all the time. And I said, well, this is the thing. I would much rather us go through it together than you just going off doing your own thing. And so his thought process was, well, going through it together, like, kind of, what does that mean? Like, he's like, I don't think you could go through it with me besides giving me sex. Like, he's like, that's what's going through together for me, is that we just have sex and it's all solved. Man, but I told him but I told him for me as a woman, we like to emotionally connect and communicate. So I'm like, by you telling me and we walking through it together, then to me, that's us going through it together. So for him, it's solving it, we have sex. And for me, it's us talking and going through it together. And so that's where so I told him what it is for me is the fact that to me, it breaks connection. And I said, because you're going off doing your own thing and I'm not a part of that and I'm your wife. And I believe that one of the intentions God had for sex was connection, the two becoming one. And it's such and whenever we do have that time, we both say we always feel more connected with each other. So if you're going off to do that by yourself and then you're leaving me out, that connection is broken. We're no longer connecting. So I told him that was my issue. Most of it was the fact that you're doing something by yourself that's supposed to be intimate and our time and us connecting. So that was the issue that I had with it.
Now, one of the things you did, because you asked me, you were asking me about God. And do you want to
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, someone was asking me. She asked me a question. It's just like, so, what's the purpose of sex, and how did God design it? And I was just like, well, you want to say what you thought how God designed it?
Yeah. So we talked about reproduction. And we talked about, of course, it also has to do with pleasure as well.
Right.
So reproduction, pleasure, and then that's when I said connectivity. So that was my thought.
Yeah, because I think at times you can forget about what God's design is. Like God designed it for connection. If you go to Genesis, before there was any reproduction, you'll see where it says Adam knew his wife, and that's what I was just talking to my wife about after we ended the conversation. That kind of came to me. It's just like, no, it was for pleasure, and then after when. Of course, after sin came, and then Adam knew his wife, then he finally had children. And actually, Cain was produced after Adam, because you see the sin nature in Cain. But anyways, we just like, it's for pleasure, it's for connection, and so when it comes to masturbation, you find yourself after a while disconnecting. Now that it can alter your relationship with God, but also the disconnection with your spouse, because it's all about you. Yeah, it's all about pleasure for you, and so someone asked me the pointed question, just like, so when you masturbate, where's the connection? Who are you connecting with? And then I was just like, wow, no, you're right. There is, you mean, I said, well, I ain't connecting with myself, Yeah. I'm just trying to do what I need to do.
And then that came up too, that he said, well, this time around, he said, when I was in porn, I would watch porn and I would do it then. But this time around, I'm not watching porn. I'm not thinking about another woman. And so that's where he didn't really see it as, I guess, not as wrong as before when you did it before in the past, because there was nobody else. But at the same time, you're still leaving your spouse out. And so when we came to the point of, so when he said that, and I said, well, what about singles? If you're single, then does that mean that you can, because there's nobody to connect with? And then that's when he came into the whole idol thing.
Yeah, hopefully I can remember everything I said.
Yeah.
I was just telling her, I said, what happens, even whether if it's singleness or it's marriage, it could become an idol, because it starts off just like, I'm just going to pleasure myself, but you begin to get so consumed with yourself. And it starts becoming an idol.
And sex can become an idol.
And sex because in this culture, it's so big. I mean, it's just everywhere. It permeates everything. And then we get caught up with part of what the world is saying, like, no, go pleasure yourself. Just it's all about you. And so when she was saying that, when someone had asked me that question, or and it got me thinking how so much that we don't rely on God. Now I want to be practical in this. So don't look at me like I'm being too spiritual, because you do have to rely on God. But like, is God not big enough to help to bring your adrenaline down? Is God not big enough to help you to fight against your mind, your mindset, and the thoughts in your mind to bring yourself down to where you can just like, okay, I was just telling her, to be honest, I said the night before, I was ready to go into the bathroom. And I told her, I was just like, I was just telling God, I was just like, okay, I don't want to do this, help to bring it down. I don't want to go there, and I just want to hold my wife.
And you said something good too. Okay. He also said when he came to God, he said, God, you are my ultimate pleasure. And I was like, yes! That was good too.
Yeah, because
he's like, you have to be my ultimate pleasure.
And that's where I came to. So my wife didn't know where my stance was when we were having the conversation. We were just having a conversation, so I think she was thinking that I was kind of like in between of, is it right or is it wrong? Is it good for me? Or I'm just saying personally opinionated for myself, because in the Bible it never says that masturbation is wrong. So now we got to take scripture and try to put scripture together. And for me, I was just like, no, I want God to be my ultimate satisfaction. And I remember that's what Ezekiel, he was doing the spoken word, he was talking about it. And that's what was in my heart. And I was just like, I can not do this. Like, this is not a need. This is a want. So people just say, well, what if I'm single and I'm single for forever? I'm single for 10 to 15 years. Here's the thing: is that how big is your God? And that's why I had to say I had to say this to myself. How big is God? And I was just like, is God bigger than my sexual impulses, my sexual urge? And I was just like, you know what? God, you are bigger than that. So help me. I was just like, God. Okay, so in the scriptures, there's this person. God, he comes to God. God, can you heal my daughter? And he said, if you can. And Jesus says, if I can. And he just says, God, just help my unbelief. Help me to believe in you. And for me, that's kind of like the story applies to me in the fact of, God, help my unbelief. Because this is where sometimes masturbation or pornography lies, is that we don't believe that God is big enough to fill that void that's in our heart. And so for me, that's where I was just like, God, I want you to be my ultimate pleasure. Like, some people could say, oh, it's right. And some people say it's wrong. For me, when I talk to people about it, I want it to be, okay, let's look at the heart issue. Because we can just put all these rules on people, but if we don't go to the heart of it and go to, how did God create this? Is what I'm doing helping to bring connection? Is it bringing intimacy? Because it's a selfless act.
Yeah.
And that's where, for me, I'm just saying, for me, that's where I was at. I was just like, this is a selfless act. Or it's a selfish act, should I say? Okay, it's about me. And I didn't realize this part. I didn't realize from my wife, where it's just like, she was like, no, Chris, this helps me to connect when you talk to me about this. And I was just like, and I, for men, I didn't, that I had to ask her again because it wasn't computing for me. I'm sorry. For a lot of women that computes for I'm not saying not all guys, for a lot of guys that don't compute. And I'm just like, okay, but I did get it. I was just like, I feel you. I understand you wanting to connect and get that connection, and me sharing, I guess, my vulnerability with you, which is sometimes it's not always the easiest thing for guys.
Yeah, because I was like, if you tell me and what you're going through and you connect with me, then I'm like, oh my goodness, he opened up. That's how I'm like, you opened up. That's so cute. I love it. So I was like, that's what I'm wanting from you, instead of you going off and doing your own thing. But I rather, and then when you have a marriage, you're Christians and you have a godly marriage, then you open yourself up, like I said before, for prayer. It's like, I can pray for you, and I can minister to you as your wife. And so it opens up. And I was like, and then if you gave me the choice, like, okay, I'm feeling this way, I'm really feeling lustful, and I'm just letting you know, then I'm like, then I probably be like, all right, let's go then. Then.
Let me go ahead and put that down.
Exactly.
I'm taking notes. And there's another thing that we talked about, sacrifice. And
yeah, because we did bring up, because I brought up the fact of, what if someone is passing away of cancer? What if that spouse is dying of cancer? Then what do? Do you go off and please yourself because that person can no longer have sex anymore because they're on their deathbed? Or do you not even go there because you're so focused on being with the one you love as they transition on? So how deep is this thing to where we have to do it, or we feel like we have to do it, or can we abstain from it?
No, and that what you were talking about, the sacrifice, that just goes apart with it when you're able to sacrifice some of your own desires and wants for that person. And then as a single person, that sacrifice comes to your relationship with God. If you view it that way, to say, God, I am going to not try to do this act, to do this because I am continuing to save myself for you, to keep that clarity of mind. You know, and for marriage folks, I realized that it's just like I'm not sacrificing when I do that.
Mm-hmm.
And marriage is sacrificial.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that goes in every area of your life. You know, whether your spouse, whether there's certain things, you know, sexually that one spouse feels uncomfortable. Well, those are the things that you just say, you know what, if you're uncomfortable, then I will sacrifice my desires and my wants for you.
Yeah.
And I think that goes into that same category to say, like, you know what, I'm not going to.
She said, does Chris have a brother? I know, right?
But yeah, but if you sacrifice, and that was for me, and that hit me, that kind of helped to seal the deal for me, because but it was just, I want to sacrifice.
Yeah.
So I want us to be close. I don't want anything to come between our closeness, because that has to do with my relationship with God. I'm accountable to God. I'm accountable to God in my relationship with my wife. And I take that seriously. So I don't know anybody. I take that serious myself.
She said, "For real though, does he?"
I'm not even gonna go there.
Yeah. He has one.
I have a brother.
He has one.
And
Tom said he does, y'all.
But that, see, it goes beyond just the rule of yes and no.
Yeah.
So you can't get that with yes and no. You got to go deeper with issues when it comes to sin, or when it comes to kind of like those black and white areas, especially when it comes to a place in the Bible where it's vague. You got to go deeper and got to go to the heart, because God is about relationship. He's about intimacy, and marriage is really a reflection of Christ in the church. And so you got to take that seriously.
And so if you're single, then that's that deep relationship with God, that intimacy with God. Right. Okay.
Because we still use that term, you're married to God. You're married to Christ.
Yeah.
So sex is supposed to be in the context of a marriage relationship, because God did that, because that's where trust and where intimacy comes from. That's where love, real love, true love comes from.
Yeah.
And what you try to do is you try to make sure that in the sexual experience, that you want to not contaminate it.
Yeah.
You want to keep it in its pure sense. How God. So you just go back and you just say, you got to go ask yourself that question.
Yeah.
Like you asked me. And it was good. It was just like, okay, how did God design sex?
Exactly.
What was his design of it all? And when you can go back to that can help you make spiritual decisions that are not so black and white in the Bible.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was our conversation, you guys. We were so hopefully we oh, it's Trey single. Tom, you must be telling everything. So hopefully we answered some of your questions. I know a lot of people were saying, is it wrong? Is it right? Is it sin? Is it not? And so one of the things we wanted to make clear was, what did Kendra say? You know, the things that
when God is specific, you be specific. But when the Bible is vague,
you be vague. Yeah.
And you know, let me wrap this up. I want to tell you where I came out of, and and everybody has to make that decision, you know, as for themselves. But for me, even before our conversation, I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. But when Summer, as we talked, it kind of really made it like it solidified it for me. Like, no, I don't want to do this anymore. This is coming between my relationship with God and coming between my relationship with my spouse. And it's causing more of a disconnection than a connection. And I want my marriage to be always about us growing together, growing closer together, because the Bible says the two shall become one. They become one flesh. And so I guess masturbating or pleasuring myself, it leads to just one person, just me. And I don't want that to be a part of our sexual experience. So I want it to be both of us, and I believe that honors God.
Yeah.
Was that cool?
Yep.
Okay.
Good to go. Thanks for watching, you guys, and thanks for all
Thank
the
you,
comments.
guys.
If we did not answer a question, we'll go back after we upload it and everything and try to answer. Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
guys.
We want to make sure we included y'all in this conversation.
Yes.
Nisha said relationship goals. Thank you.
All right,
Good night.
you guys. Good night.